Imagine one day you're watching a new Fate series, and then, when the Berserker gets summoned, Kratos shows up. Or maybe Ezio appears as an assassin. That would definitely blow your mind. And if that actually happened, what do you think the concept would look like? And what other things that we might not even realize would happen in Holy Grail War like this? Let's talk about this for a bit because I remember something interesting about this kind of war setup. You know, the Fate series is actually huge, right? At this point, it kind of feels like its own genre. Yeah, it's still fantasy and action and all that, but the way they use the system, especially the Holy Grail War system, is very unique. Like, you can recognize it instantly. It's always the same core idea. A group of powerful characters all placed into one system, fighting until one side wins. That part never really changed. But even though the core stayed the same, every war has small changes. And those changes are important because they keep the concept fresh. If you look at Fate, the idea keeps evolving. First, it's 7 servants based on history and myth battle royale each other. Then, in another war, they increase the number of participants, change the world, and add new classes. Then, you get 7 versus 7 wars, a complex fake wars that turns into real ones. And now in FGO, we actually have 1 versus 7. And there are still a lot more. So you see that, right? Even though the system stays familiar, the setup keeps changing. And that naturally makes you wonder, what if instead of summoning historical figures, Fate started summoning fictional characters instead? Like, the guys who will fight is characters from anime, game, or manga. Imagine a Grail War like that. Instead of heroes of the past, you get characters like Kirito as a saber, Irene as a caster, or even Iron Man as an archer. Because, you know, archer never use bows and arrows, right? Anyway, that sounds chaotic but also kinda cool. Yeah, I know, they don't fit the usual rules. They're not heroic spirits, they don't have any regrets tied to the throne, and their power system are completely different. But let's be honest, Fate's magic system is already so complex that if the writers really wanted to, they could probably make it happen, easily. Like, I'm not even joking, the authors who worked on Fate can somehow turn the weirdest magical concept into something that I can actually nod along to. Like, for example, who doesn't remember the mana transfer method? I can't really talk about it here, obviously, but you can look it up for yourself. They can also convince you that some famous figures in history were actually a woman in disguise. And one of them, who is very famous, at some point literally grew a fucking penis to produce an heir. And if you count all the event shenanigans in the game, you would probably lose count, I swear. So yeah, I believe balancing different power systems would be easy work for the writers, if this concept ever actually happened. But unfortunately, well, realistically, this will probably never happen, because copyright alone would make this an absolute nightmare. You can't just throw random characters from different franchises into one series. At best, they would have to parody them or create original characters inspired by them. Which is why I want to point this out. We actually already have something like that. There is a show where people from different eras and worlds are summoned, and they end up fighting each other. And no, it's not Fate. It's called Recreators. Now yeah, it's a bit old now, so some of you might not know it, but conceptually, it's probably the closest thing we have to that what if idea. I mean, just look at the title. You could literally slap Fate in front of it, and it would still sound legit, especially with how Fate titles love throwing in some random words. Anyway, Recreators is an original anime by Studio Troika, written by Rei Hiroe and directed by Ei Aoki, who also co-wrote the script, and if you don't know, this guy also directed Fate Zero. So you can kind of feel slightly similar, like heavier tone, like how Fate Zero was. The premise is basically this: creators, writers, artists, developers, and all that accidentally bring their own characters into the real world. And once those characters shows up, they start clashing. Different worlds, different power system, different ideologies, all from completely different type of media. You've got a fantasy knight from a light novel, an NPC librarian from a JRPG, a character from cyberpunk manga, even a girl from a dating game. It's basically every type of fictional characters thrown into one battlefield. And at that point, it already feels like a Grail War. You can even see a class-like structure. Now, I know I said earlier that they would need a parody of original characters, and that's exactly what this anime does. Most of the characters are original, and well, some clearly take inspiration from existing characters. But here's the interesting part. This was not the original plan. There is a story that Ray Creator's anime was first planned as a massive crossover with real characters. But the problem is they couldn't decide who would win. So they scrapped the idea. That idea didn't work, and we got this version instead. So yeah, we were actually really close to getting a literal Holy Grail War with fictional characters we all know. That's crazy. Now that's the fun part of imagining a Holy Grail War with fictional characters. You get to see your favorite waifu or husbando fighting characters from completely different media. I mean, the idea of summoning dead people to fight is already interesting enough. But once you mix in fictional characters, things can get pretty crazy. Beyond all the fighting and cool moments, I think there are also some really unsettling things hiding behind this concept. Like, the more you think about it, the weirder it gets. First, think about how massive the world building will become. Because when a fictional story is created, it basically creates its own world, its own reality. And if we imagine there is a Grail War using a fictional characters, the people participating, the mages involved in a Grail War like this, would obviously try to summon the deadliest one possible. The most lethal characters one, and the most effective one, I assume. Now, imagine horror villains, monsters, and supernatural beings being summoned into the real world just because someone wants a wish-granting cup. Super villains, serial killers, kaiju, eldritch horrors, and a lot more. Absolute nightmares. And the scary part is, summoning in Fate already goes wrong all the time. You don't always get exactly what you want. So, beyond the massive number of dangerous fictional characters that could be summoned, there is also a huge risk of things going completely wrong and accidentally bringing out something even worse, something far more dangerous and completely out of control. That's terrifying. And honestly, we already saw something close to that in Fate's Strange Fate. A sick, bedridden child can literally summon one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Literally a plague, a living concept of death. Now, imagine something on that level. And if you know the monsters from horror films, they can do things even worse than that. The second thing that really gets interesting is the fact that these fictional characters would eventually realize something horrible. They are fictional. Their lives were written by someone else. And this is where the whole rage against the author idea starts becoming terrifying. I'm using Ray Creators as the main example here because this is literally one of the biggest conflicts in that anime. For example, there's a character named Alisteria February. She's the Lancer-looking one. She comes from a dark fantasy manga. If I have to compare it, it's honestly pretty similar to Berserk. At one point, she realizes her entire world exists only for entertainment. And when she finds out the truth, she completely crashes out. Minor spoiler here, but she literally chases her own creator everywhere, crashes into a police station, and after finally finding him, she kidnaps him and demands that he take responsibility for her world. And remember, her world is basically like Berserk, brutal, it's miserable and constant suffering. And that's one of the more controlled reactions. Now, imagine what would happen if characters with no morality realize the same things. Imagine characters realizing all their suffering was intentionally written, that their pain was planned, that every tragedy in their life existed because someone thought it would make a good money. Okay, yeah, that's disturbing. And now that I think about it, Fate does have characters shaped by stories and legends written by other people, but I feel like they never really pushed the idea this far. Though, to be fair, Fate usually has its own twists and conflicts about what's real and what's not. Meanwhile, Ray Creators basically throws that concept into the main conflict. Even the main antagonist's motivation comes from this exact idea. Okay, those were kinda unsettling, weren't they? But aside from those two disturbing things, I also think there is something that would actually be really entertaining about this whole fictional characters battle royale, and I just realized what it is. It's actually about the power system. Because in Fate, Heroic spirits become strong through their legends, right? The more famous the legend is, the stronger the heroic spirit becomes. Now imagine applying that same idea to fictional characters. Their legend would basically become their lore, everything people know about them. The story, their feats, author statements, trivia, fan discussions, memes, and the way the audience sees them. At that point, lore basically becomes the new legend. And that means creators and fandoms could technically support the characters during the war itself. If an author gives a character a crazy new feat, that could make them stronger. If a fandom keeps spreading an idea or meme about a character long enough, that perception could slowly become attached to the character itself. And honestly, recreators already shows how insanely cool this kind of power system can be. You see, there is a character named Altair. What makes her special is that she doesn't come from a proper manga, anime, or game, or books, or any source. She's basically just an original character that spread around the internet through music video, which means her image is heavily shaped by online discussion, fan interpretation, and fan art. People saw her military design, her vibe, her presence, and started building stories and ideas around her. And the more people talk about her, imagine things about her, and created content of her, the bigger her legend becomes. That's why she becomes absurdly powerful in the anime. She's basically powered by public perception. And you know what's crazy is that recreators goes even further with this idea. In episode 20, there is a montage showing fan art of Altair to show how just massive her support and online presence really are. And the crazy part is, those were actual real-life fan art uploaded by real artists on Pixiv. Which means the anime literally used real-world fan content as part of Altair's power. And honestly, that's such a cool idea. Because if a Holy Grail War with fictional characters ever existed, then the audience themselves would become part of the war. People online would absolutely start making fan arts, memes, theories, and discussions just to support the characters they want to win. And if the series didn't fully use the same power system as recreators, that alone would probably be one of the most fun parts of the whole event. Now, I know everything I just talked about for the past 10 minutes is basically just a big what-if scenario, since there is almost no way they would actually do something like this. But if a Holy Grail with fictional characters really existed, who do you think would participate? And more importantly, who would you support? Also, if you still want to watch characters from different worlds beat the hell out of each other, you can always watch Death Battle on YouTube. That's it for today. Share this video around, and if you enjoy it, I'll see you guys next time.